In the name of God, love, beloved, and spirit of love. Amen. The stages of child development are fascinating, aren't they? Belinda and Matt will be seeing that at the moment with Catherine and James. One of the stages in the developmental process is among the most wonderful and yet the most frustrating of them all. And that is when the child is so fascinated with the world around them and has such a keen desire to explore and learn that they ask why all the time. Why is the sky blue, Mum? Why is the sun hot, Dad? But why? And as a parent or other significant person in that little person's life, we do our very best to give them the correct information in the words that aren't too difficult to understand. And yet often it doesn't matter what we say, they always come back with the response, but why? I don't know about you, but I felt like that ever-questioning child as I read today's gospel reading. As I found myself repeating, but why? But what does that mean? But how does that work? As I read. If someone sins against you, go and point out the fault. But why? Isn't that incredibly judgmental? If the offender refuses to listen to you, take some others with you so that they can also be there to talk about the person's fault. But why? Isn't that incredibly humiliating? If the offender still won't listen, chuck them out. But why? Didn't Jesus teach about inclusion, not exclusion? Question upon question upon question. I wonder if one of the things we find hard about this passage is how we've seen people use it. We've seen it used by churches in ways that make people feel small, to exert power over people and to exclude people. This model for settling disputes has been misused and turned into something unfeeling, uncaring, and unloving. It's been used legalistically to label and judge people. So what is going on here? Perhaps looking at what the author of Matthew was trying to do may help us. Because as we read around and deeper into this passage, rather than pronouncing unfair discipline, Matthew's concern seems to be for community, for honest, authentic Christian community. What we see referred to in this passage is that these two people in dispute are already in relationship. They are, or at least were, friends. The Greek translation apparently is brother. If your brother or sister sins against you, Jesus says, they are friends. They're like family to each other. Now, of course, in our culture, the term friend has become looser and looser. We can be friends with people on Facebook, but this doesn't at all convey the depth that friendships can hold. And of course, if we're in dispute with anybody on Facebook, and we've seen much of that, we can simply unfriend them. Easy. Facebook friends is certainly not the kind of relationship that is being referred to here. Jesus seems to be talking about a much, much deeper relationship, and the need then to bring reconciliation, forgiveness, and healing into broken relationships. Some churches have been accused of being nothing more than Christianized golf clubs, like-minded people getting together to socialize, but their relationships never really go any further than that. Our moderator, Simon Hansford, once said, "We are called to be disciples, not a group of like-minded mates." Jesus seems to be calling us then to go much deeper in our relationships with each other. These two friends in this story, these two brothers, these two sisters, are in disagreement, and Jesus seems to be giving them a three-step approach to dealing with this. And yet, I wonder if it's actually more than this. Jesus encourages the church to be a community that nurtures honest dialogue and refuses to keep silent in the face of harmful behavior. By hearing this passage in its context, we can see that actually its primary function seems less about defining a universal three-stepped approach to conflict resolution and more to a model around how to walk alongside and protect those who are being disempowered or made vulnerable, enabling them to speak so that others might hear. If the person won't listen to you, Jesus' suggestion is to enlist the help and the support of your community, to stand alongside you, to advocate for you, to work your corner. Right before today's passage, Jesus talks about concern for the little ones, those who are given the least power within the dominant community. Jesus focuses attention on their vulnerability by centering a child in the middle of the disciples. And he proclaims that it would be better to be thrown into the sea with a millstone around your neck than to place a stumbling block to one like this. This is a strong warning against attitudes and practices that obstruct human flourishing for all of the children of God. Jesus then goes on to talk about the parable of the lost sheep, for whose sake the shepherd leaves the 99 in order to seek the one who is lost. In Matthew's version of the parable, there is no hint that the single sheep is more sinful than the 99, or that it is in any way inferior to the others. It has simply been led astray. No cause is given, and it's left to our imagination. So just as the child matters to Jesus, the lone sheep matters to the shepherd. Both teachings focus the church's attention on those who face the larger risks or have the least power and the most to lose, or who find themselves to be in a dangerous or vulnerable situation, often through no fault of their own. The process of truth-telling and accountability in this passage, then, is about the church's call to protect the disempowered and vulnerable ones, walking alongside them in solidarity. At the other bookend to today's passage, we hear Jesus talking about forgiveness. Then Peter came and said to him, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. And Jesus goes on to give the parable of the unforgiving servant. So far from our reading today being about uncaring, unloving victimization, it is actually about love and deep listening and forgiveness. It's about reconciliation and restoration. It's about truth-telling and about justice. It's about community and being the community of God. We all belong to this community here at St. David's. And some of us are new to this community and others have been here all their lives. And others of us fit somewhere in between. Community is one of those feel-good words, isn't it? That draws us into idealisms. We imagine something out of the Waltons, a place where you're accepted for who you are, where you're never lonely, and where, of course, everybody knows your name. Good night, John Boy. Good night, Mary Ellen. A place where you are welcomed and valued and where you're loved. We also know that as much as this idyllic image often filtrates our films and books and social media, the reality is very different. You may remember, like me, watching an episode of Yes, Minister, where the Prime Minister and his assistant Humphrey were discussing the success of the new hospital, which was meeting all its goals and running on budget. And it turns out that this was because it actually hadn't opened to the public yet and there were no people in there. We people have an uncanny knack of breaking the ideal, don't we? And sadly, relationships in community get broken. Jesus says that our task is to restore community by deep, deep listening. And listening is in fact mentioned 4 times in just the first 3 verses of our passage. Relationships in community require huge time, great risk, effort, energy, and prayer. They are costly, as things of value are. And our task is also to recognize that the community is not actually about me, it's about us. How our relationships are then is fundamental to the kind of community that we are. Authentic community is hard work, but as Jesus promises, when we gather in this way, with honesty and integrity, even when it's hard, amazing things can happen, because Jesus is right here with us in our midst. Today, we have welcomed Catherine through baptism into the community of the Worldwide Church. A community that tries to love each other and sometimes does that really, really well, and sometimes does that terribly. We haven't invited her into a community of perfect people with the expectation that she matches some unreachable high standard, with the expectation that she conforms to something other than the beautiful, unique person that she is and will grow into being. We invite her into a family who is loved by God in all our imperfection and all our struggle. And we invite her to belong and journey with us as we try our best to follow Jesus. Amen. Let's take a short moment of stillness.